So hey everybody, we're back on an episode of Insiders today with Keith Jopling. Hey Keith.
Hey David, how are you?
Very well, thanks. So I'm gonna introduce you a little bit, and you're truly an insider. You were running global research for the IFPI until 2006. You then worked for EMI and the BPI, amongst other companies, as a consultant, always doing research and insights. And you ended up running until 2 years ago. Your role was global head of strategic intelligence, and we'll get back into what that means, which is essentially leading the teams inside and outside facing to use data, building products, but also improving the company's performances. You left Spotify 2 years ago, and you're currently the consulting director for MIDiA Research. MIDiA, for the people who don't know, is by far the leading independent research entity in the music industry, and their research pieces, some of them you write, are just truly amazing. The last initiatives you launched is something called the Song Sommelier, and we'll talk about it towards the end of the program, and we'll also link to it so everybody can kind of discover the music that you're showcasing. So yeah, hey Keith, great to have you on the program.
It's great to be here. Nice introduction. It's brilliant the way you condensed what is effectively 20 years into just 2 minutes there. I wish I could do that.
Is it great or is it brutal?
No, it's great. I think it's absolutely great. I mean, there was, to expand on a couple of things. So in between Spotify and MIDiA, I did spend a year at Sony Music as well.
That's true.
Working for their playlist team, their analytics playlist team, and also for global digital business as a strategic advisor to that group. So it's nice to have a little space in a corporate at this particular time in the industry. It was 12 to 15 months, and I still do a little bit of work with Sony Music as well.
So actually, when I was preparing the interview, I tried to scroll all the way down on your LinkedIn profile, and I saw that you had worked at Novartis. So some of you who don't know, it's a gigantic pharmaceutical conglomerate who merged and acquired a bunch of other conglomerates. So just to go back in time, can you explain to me, how did you start to do research and insights, and how did you end up in the music industry? Was pharmaceutical your initial path, or was it more something you wanted to try along the way?
I believe in serendipity. This will be a theme throughout the conversation. So I tend to follow what looked to me to be good opportunities at the time. I'm a great believer in serendipity and chance, and to some extent making those opportunities as you go along as well. So I had no intention of really having a career in the music industry. If I'd have thought about it, I probably would have done it from the start, but I just never considered it to be a serious job, if you like. So when I left, I did business at business school in Birmingham in the UK. When I left there, I actually became a management consultant for Accenture back at the very early days of Accenture, doing pretty serious stuff, like coding huge computer programs for power stations and electricity and water businesses and stuff. It was like really heavy going stuff. And I got out of that. I went into a small public policy boutique consultancy that did a lot of work in healthcare. So I was in that organization for 3 or 4 years, and we were really pitching work to the pharmaceuticals industry, and then I was poached by Novartis. And that's the first time I really did researchy stuff, because before that it had been some analytics, but more consulting programs. But with Novartis, I joined their insight team. So I had a team of 6 people across the business, looking at both over-the-counter or like everyday general practice drugs, and then some more serious stuff that would go through the hospital system. And it was great fun. It was amazing, because having been trained in consultancy, I was able to kind of bring that approach to inside a company, so to run things as projects, get things done much faster, do more internally. So we outsourced a lot less. We could just do it ourselves. And it was the whole piece. It was, it was tapping into the insights. It was commissioning the research. It was running some of the data programs, doing the forecasts. Yeah, it was great. It was great fun. I would have probably stayed there had I not seen a job advert for the IFPI just at a conference. I just picked it up and read it and thought I'll do that instead, and it
Uh,
worked out.
I was going to ask you how was the switch? How did you make the switch? So you were literally at a conference and you saw something from the IFPI and you figured why not, and it ended up becoming a 20-year path for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I wouldn't have thought that I could ever switch into entertainment. But I just saw, literally, it was a copy of the FT. I remember it was the jobs page of the FT. Someone had left it on the chair in front of me at this conference, and it just said something like senior researcher. Even then, I didn't think I would get the job, but there was some small print right at the bottom of the ad that said, we're looking for people from other IP backgrounds, including publishing, blah blah blah, pharmaceuticals. So it was almost like that that job had my name on it. Really, that's what it felt like. So I mean, I went through a fair process to get it, but in the end, yeah, they offered it to me, and then I've been in the industry on and off ever since, mostly on.
How so? It's I mean, you were at the FBI until 2006, but ran the research for 6 years. So we're talking you entering into 2000, and you had you knew how it worked in pharmaceutical, where the budgets are much different. How was it working at Insight so early in music? What was the structure? Were the methods completely archaic? Did you end up finding things that you thought, oh, people are actually doing things well? Was it really the beginning of everything? How was the switch?
I think it probably was pretty much the beginning of everything. Because I'd come from pharma, where we had, at any one time, we had 3 or 4 major databases where you could see your pipeline sales, you could see your immediate sell through of any drug line by week or by month by channel. Some, not real time, but some pretty cool data in terms of managing demand, if you like. And I remember in my interview for the IFPI, so I was interviewed by Jay Berman, who's an industry legend. He still consults in the business. He was the chairman and CEO at the time. I remember walking him through my vision for the data, and I was like, we can turn this into online analytical processing tools where we can offer this to the members in the record labels, where they can click and drag and do the analysis. He was like, you're not going to do any of that. He's just like, that is not going to happen. I just need somebody to improve what we have, and that's basic. So it was pretty basic. We produced the yearbook, and the first 2 years was improving the publications, but cleaning up the data. So, and that was a lot of work. So we did, in the end, drag that data into a Microsoft analytics platform where we could do basic analysis, and we could do the click and drag stuff in the team, and that we would be able to handle queries much quicker on behalf of the members. And in the end, we actually put a front end on it, and we were able to put it in front of the members as well. So that was 2 or 3 years work. And then on top of that, we did, we started publishing market shares. That was a ton of work. Any new format that came along, so measuring music video, we had to go through the process of setting up the definitions with the labels, getting labels to produce data, getting national groups to produce data, getting them to do it in a more self-serve fashion so that they could enter the data straight into the system. We could verify it, all kinds of checks and balances. But the major changes were, I think, probably about 3 years into it. I had this vision that this is probably the best legacy I left the IFPI at the time. I could see that the retail side of the business was only going to go one way, which was down, right? So it was CDs being discounted. We had all kinds of issues with pricing as well as sales just going south. But on the other hand, the licensing business was looking like at some point it would pick up. So you were licensing to Microsoft, Apple, the licensing side of the business from a sync point of view, all of this stuff where the business was becoming like a trade rather than a product retail business. So we flipped the whole thing from measuring retail value, which was something around, from memory, maybe around $20 billion. We overnight changed it to measuring the trade value of the business, which meant that it was right down to like 12 or 13 billion dollars, which was a very controversial meeting with the heads of the labels. It went to a vote in the end. It went to a vote, and it was like being in court. It was like a majority vote. There were 11 members of the board. 9 voted to do it, and 2 voted against. I'm not going to say who voted against, but at that point, the industry decided we can demonstrate we're a growing business by presenting everything we do on a trade basis, rather than these kind of dodgy retail numbers, because no one really knew the price anyway.
Yeah, and I guess also at one point when you realize the market is going a certain way, changing the way you audit it and the way you index it allows for everybody to look in the future rather than looking behind. And creating a new index, accepting that the overall value would have been facing, the world would have seen it as facing a lower value, but actually looking at it as a trade market from that day onward is a huge change. If you are what you measure and you improve what you measure. So I guess if you measure the wrong things, and if you're looking at the wrong things, then you're just kind of looking at the past. Um, Very
Yeah,
interesting. I want to kind of jump because I wanted to leave a lot of time for something that we'll get to a little bit after. You so you end up arriving at Spotify. I'm kind of making a little bit of a leap there. You end up arriving at Spotify pre-IPO in 2015. In 2015, I think it was the company that everybody had the most question about. Today, that my company might be TikTok because nobody really understands it. But
yeah,
2015 to 17 is literally the explosion of Spotify. It became a complete household name, basically globally. And it's basically just pre-IPO. Your role had very broad implication at the company. Um, from the title being Global Head of Strategic Intelligence. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was working at the company? How did you arrive there? And some of the accomplishments between 2015 and 17 that you guys did, kind of around your role, of course.
yeah, sure. So yeah, I started off consulting with Spotify. So in 2015, at the end of the summer, I think Apple Music had launched. I think Apple Music launched that summer, I think. And there were competitors coming into the market. They were getting a little worried because they were on the cusp of this hypergrowth. I think they probably had just stepped into hypergrowth. Um, but at that point, the whole thing could have been nipped in the bud by competitors. They're like really serious competitors, right? I mean, maybe you wouldn't have been so worried, or Daniel Ek wouldn't have been so worried if it hadn't have been Apple, Amazon, um, Pandora in the US, of course, coming into the space, and also SoundCloud flipping its business from what it was to being effectively a premium subscription business. So you had 3 or 4 major competitors coming in, and they weren't sure whether that was just going to stop them in their tracks or whether it was nothing to worry about. So I joined as a consultant. I did 3 months analyzing the competitive space. And basically, at the end of that 3 months, my conclusion was you have nothing to worry about. For a variety of reasons, these may be the biggest brands on the planet, but they have just not got their shit together in terms of the audience, the product, the proposition. They're either transitioning from something else. It's going to take a long time. So there was a window of opportunity. Just step into hypergrowth, just step on the gas and move forward. So following that, I think they were impressed enough by that work and that view to then offer me a role. So then I spec'd out my own role. And it
That's
was,
always nice.
yeah, it's great. Well, it's actually a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because if you write
Okay.
your own job spec, it's your perception of what you think is needed. And I think looking back on it, if I'd have changed anything about joining Spotify at that time, I would have probably, before I even did that, I would have said to several stakeholders in the business, what is it that you really think? But I did that when we got inside. Um, so I created this job spec. I came on board with one person and then quickly hired another person. And then we got together with another team, which is the corporate strategy team. And we started to sort of do something a little bit different. So we continued with the competitive stuff. But what I really found was needed was that at the time Spotify had this is a very ambitious company. And they could have gone in different directions to keep that growth. So they're always looking for what's next, which is the smart way of thinking. So, I mean, it's driven by essentially, I think, just one of the smartest people around. So it's very much in Daniel's vision, the way that they keep growing the business. And he was always thinking, okay, what is next? And how important is the timing? When is the timing going to be right? And at that point, when you're in a hyper growth company like Spotify, you had everybody doing the same work. So you'd find somebody in the product organization in Stockholm doing research on podcasts. You'd then have somebody in New York in marketing doing research on podcasts, and of course coming up with a different take on things. And they had this system where it was a central bet system, which people know about now, where it was about gathering the insights, figuring out where Spotify could play and how quickly they could succeed. So a lot of it was to do that work differently and do it better, just bringing my experience to it, how you assess an opportunity. Not boiling the ocean, like doing it at speed, doing it with a light touch, but bringing frameworks to it. And we did the early work on podcasts. We did the early work on the creator marketing. We also took another really hard look at music video. We took a hard look at voice, and the whole thing was about just taking on radio through the ad tech. It was about assessing what's next. So what's next? How do we do it, and when? And there was a big amount of coordination. So I think my personal challenge at Spotify was that. So I went into a business to do essentially an insight role, and at the time there was a marketing insights organization. The data organization was starting to grow hugely. So that's just the army of people looking at the data strategy and all of the internal behavioral analysis. There was a team in New York doing that. There was a product insights group based out of Stockholm and New York doing a lot of insights, product design and what sits where on the real estate, and how the color of how this looks and how that looks. There was Will Page's economics team in there as well. So they had like a lot of people having a different say on data and insights. So I formed a network of those people and just basically started to try and get a dialogue going between us, get a process of how we would improve that system of bets, and just collaborating more on stuff. So it was nice to run that network because I was working with some amazing people.
Yeah, amazing people, and every week there must have been new people arriving, company scaling. You mentioned like a lot of the positive aspects about working in such a specific company in changing the industry it's in. What are without getting into any like detail, but what are the challenges in working in such an organization between that and, for example, a Novartis, which is a much bigger company but less of a growth company? There is something about hyper growth that is brutal for organization in terms of operations. Is there anything you can share in that on that side?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of it depends on what kind of a person you are. And I think in my experience, I found working in that hyper growth environment really challenging because I had previously either worked in a slow moving business or as a consultant in a business that's a little bit fucked up for whatever reason. Like the reason they hire consultants as problem solvers is because they've got to fix something. Either we have to find growth quickly, or we have to find profitability quickly, or we need to understand this market better. And in a way, like if you do that kind of work, people listen because they need to know the answer. I think the challenge is in a company like Spotify between 2015 and now is that, and I don't want this to come out wrong, but like for what I was doing, I did a lot of interesting work, but it didn't really make that much of a difference because whatever you did, if you woke up in the morning, you arrived at work, you'd sold another 1,000 subscriptions because the business had just started to basically take off and multiply by itself. So I don't think at that point they probably didn't need so much insight, certainly around the marketing and the brand. They probably didn't need that much insight on the product. And they probably had too many people with not enough data because they were still cleaning up all of the data as well. Don't forget that was a 2 or 3 year track for Spotify to get all of that data lined up and in the right pools and with the right tools to draw on it to actually make decisions. So, I mean, my advice, if you're working in a hyper growth company, get where the growth is in the company. Because again, at Spotify, there was always a little bit of tension between those guys that built the product and the engineering side of it, and then the guys who were in the content side who were doing the industry relations, doing the content marketing, kind of becoming like almost like a music company. That was a clash of cultures and I think a challenge for both sides. And I guess, it's about if you're in a growth company, maybe it's better if you're in the part of the company that's actually driving the growth. If you're kind of stuck between and you're trying to service both sides and all of that, it can get frustrating. So, it's difficult. I mean, I like to feel like my work is valued wherever I go. And I think at Spotify, I feel like it was valued for its interest and the style, the way we did it, and the way we communicated it. So everybody thought what we did was amazing and really super interesting, but I don't know if it changed so many decisions. And a lot of that is timing. So I'm proud that we did the early work on podcasting because that's become a thing for Spotify. And I think the genius of how they've moved into the space is all about timing. They could have done it 5 years ago, it would have been too early. If they'd have done it now, it would have been too late. So the fact that they stepped in about a year ago and really pressed hard on that pedal, they timed it just right.
Yeah, the podcast timing is a great point. I always thought at Spotify, like compared, and maybe not YouTube is going to be the same now, but because they have two businesses, they have the freemium, which is an ad tech business, basically just selling ads, and then they have the subscription business. I always thought internally, if you frustrate people more in the freemium, they will convert more, so that's great for the subscription people. But then there is less people, using the ad and relying on, and so that's bad for the ads people. And I always thought in
Yeah.
such a fast growing business, a subscription is making the lion's share and an ad is not. And so I'm thinking, I don't know anybody who does that, but it must not be easy to make yourself heard if you're running ads when subscription is like 90% of the money.
Yeah, totally. I think the guys in the ad side of the business know that they're in it for the long game. So I mean, it's interesting you say, because one of the first things I observed when I joined the business is the forecasts for the ad side of the business were just hugely optimistic. Like, well, that's never going to happen. The next 2 years, it's not going to be 20% of your revenues. It's not going to be that huge because the infrastructure isn't really there for selling audio ads. And people there's already was such an established, if really poor, audio ads business in radio. Like it's due for disruption, but it's going to take maybe 10 years to get there. So I think that, again, one of the things I'm really proud of when we did the work on that side of the business was just recalibrating the expectations a little bit and knowing that they're making an investment for really, really long term, which is, I think is going to bear fruit for Spotify in years to come.
So you mentioned radio, and it's a great segue. You wrote a piece on MIDiA. It's bigger than a piece. It's called Five. What is it called? 5 Trends Changing Music Marketing.
Yeah.
And so the first thing actually you mentioned is the linear decline, which is obviously consumption of radio and so forth. So what I wanted to do is just read the five and then potentially get your reaction on each. So the five trends are: one, managing linear decline; two, managing streaming economics and higher song volumes; three, managing post-album creativity, which is a fascinating one for me; fourth is managing a global local culture, and I think everybody can understand really what it means now with reggaeton and the Spotify launch in India and so forth.
Mm.
Then there is managing music's value, which is obviously highly important. We talked about monetization, and then fan upsells, and how money can be left on the table if artists are not trying to monetize all their way. So, taking kind of top to
Yeah.
bottom, why is managing linear decline a big trend or a big challenge for the industry as a whole?
I think if you look at it in terms of, first of all, if you look at the business as a whole, right, you've got a radio business that is worth, I don't know, is it still worth $50 billion, something around that? So there's a huge chunk of value that you do not want to lose. So it's a bit like, how is that business going to translate itself to migrate to digital formats and not lose that revenue, or that revenue shifts over to the likes of Spotify and YouTube, and still filters through to the rights organizations and the artists. So I think that is a really important shift. If you're in those businesses, right? If you're in radio, what's interesting about that is, where do you go from here? Like, how do you maintain relevance, importance? How do you still make sure you're a key part of the culture, both in terms of what consumers listen to, but also how artists come through the system? And I've done some work with radio broadcasters, both at MIDiA and beforehand. And we found primarily what is an issue is maybe a lack of confidence. Like, they feel like they're a bit battered and bruised by on-demand audio coming along, and big brands going with that. And they feel like they ought to start maybe copying what they do. So they've become more interested in data. They become more interested in playlists. They become interested in things that they're not so good at. Whereas if they really focus on things that they are good at, which is programming, bringing personality to it, having these brilliant curators that people trust, and really exploring music as a cultural scene, and growing an audience that way, they can do more with that in these new environments than they currently feel they can do. So my main mantra is for radio is to really step up, be more confident about what they do, and to feel like their lunch is not going to be eaten by the streaming platforms, because that's not necessarily true. And I think that the industry itself is just going to have to figure out a way of recognizing that and play to those strengths.
It's interesting that you are talking about the decline of radio and the growth of on demand. Everybody talks about the growth of the industry, forgetting that radio is declining and that radio is part of the industry. So either it becomes a zero-sum game where the decline of one balances the growth of the other. It could all
Yeah.
become a very positive game where everybody's growing and maybe radio just kind of stops declining. Or it could be a very negative moment where radio keeps declining and actually the growth of on demand doesn't really take for that loss. You mentioned radios or media just trying to do things that they're not usually doing, and I will link to it. But the YouTube channel of the BBC or BBC One is amazing. They do videos. They have the
Yeah.
personality of the presenter. I think they have a huge subscriber count today, and it's becoming part of the radio strategy to go off platform. Um,
Yeah.
just like Spotify is doing music festivals to go off platform in a way. So that's
Yeah.
interesting.
They start. The thing is, they start off from having more media to work with, because they already have TV productions. It's such a big part of what a brand like the BBC does. So in many ways, they start off with this joined up media where they can tell the stories across that medium, build those audiences across that media, And that's still a big advantage because effectively that is what um, any brand that's built on an app like Spotify wants to do the opposite. Like at some point, you've got to build your audience off that app. So that's when you get all the really interesting convergence of the competition. But yeah, I mean, old media's kind of already got all of those great production values and knows how to join the dots in terms of building audiences.
Yeah,
And
maybe having trust and playing, they should play with their strength rather than trying to go for their weaknesses. I think that's what you're saying.
I'm a massive believer in that because one of the things that you find with strategy is that the grass is always greener on the other side. So there's a lot of envy between businesses and leaders of businesses where they look on a high growth business over there and they want some of that. And you know, Spotify and Apple and Amazon, they suffer from that as well, right? So I mean, sometimes it's best to you can certainly do that. You can look at how you move into a parallel business. That's absolutely great. When it gets dangerous is where you're diversifying too much from your skill set because you have to leave behind what you're really good at, and then it becomes a total mess. But I just want to mention on the competing side, one of the reasons why the industry needs to collaborate more, and this is on labels and publishers to drive this collaboration. So don't forget about radio. Don't leave it behind. Work with radio to build on its strengths because you're absolutely right what you said before. Probably the biggest competition that music faces is other formats. And we see that all the time with the analysis we do at MIDiA is, you know, video is eating up more time, gaming is eating up more time, social is eating up more time. Podcasts now will eat up more audio time from music. So you got to look at competition as being everything. That's how it works in the attention economy, right? We all know that now. It's about understanding what to do about it.
Yeah, the Netflix CEO is very vocal about the fact that his competition is not really the Disney Plus or the others, is any other type of entertainment, including like people going to Disneyland or something. Because whenever they're at Disney,
Yeah,
they're not physically in front of their TV,
right.
which
Glass
it's
of
just,
wine or sleep or
yeah,
yeah,
and like
whatever.
it's basically brain time. Yeah, and that's a brutal world, but that really what it means is you're either listening to music or you're outside or you're eating food or you're talking to people, and people are battling for brain time, which is the ultimate goal. All right, so number two, managing streaming economics and higher song volumes. Um, let's go into it.
Yeah, yeah. Number two is a challenge for labels and artists, much more than it's a challenge for the platforms. So the platforms are fine with this, right? They can manage this through stations, through playlists, and through increasing personalization. So the song volume they have solved. The supplier side is not then does not have that solved because if you're an artist, you're finding you're just competing with vastly more other artists for songs, and we've seen this with however many it is now. 40,000, 50,000 tracks a day. I've lost count. I think people quote these figures. It's a lot. It's too much. And then as a label, obviously your challenge is, is economics. So you don't know which ones to back. You have to put money behind those tracks to grow them. That's their job is to market those. And then you need to know what's working quickly. So which ones do you drop? Which ones do you pursue and persevere with? But most of all, you got to keep getting more through. Otherwise, you're going to lose market share. So the whole thing needs some reassessment of how that's done because in the label system, still, even though they are better with the reactive stuff, so they can see what's working and they tend to know whether to drop it or press a lever and see what else they can try. But essentially, it's still a very human effort to market a track. And you need to buy into it. You need to really work it hard across all of these platforms you have. And you need to stick with it and see, you know, which audience it's going to resonate with in which market around the world. All of which is a human effort, which is very, very exhausting. So for me, over the next 1, 2, 3 years, I think the big success stories in music will be marketing technology. so maybe this is an opportunity for Soundcharts. Maybe it's an opportunity for the Features FM of this world, or anyone that can give a sense of automated tools with attribution that you can put more songs through the system, and you know what's working sooner, and you know which songs you to invest in on the bigger scale because they're already working. So you're going to waste less time and waste less money. And that is a huge challenge for labels because they've previously been a quality over quantity operation. Now they have to be a quantity optimization type operation, and they still have to do the quality bit on top. So really interesting to see how the distribution players are going to be able to do this. The likes of AWOL and Cobalt, do they really have a different story to tell because they're managing far more tracks across the base of their label? And how are the majors going to respond to it as well?
Yeah, with sorry, with song volume, I think everybody thinks right now it's growing as fast as it will. My bet is that in 1, 2, or 3 years, there's a lot of and there's starting to be a lot of websites where you can literally just generate music copyright free and use it. That is going to generate thousands, millions of songs, with the whole copyright, like who does the song belong to in the end. But the volume of releases is going to keep growing exponentially for a few years. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about 200,000, 300,000, 500,000 tracks a day, just because the effort it takes to make a song is close to zero. I'm not talking about quality of music and quality of the artist. I'm just talking about the matter, music as a matter that you can just push through a pipeline. And if a AI generating like music company just wants to, whenever it generates the song, to just through an API automatically push it on the platform, with one company you could have thousands of songs a day because the computing power that it takes is not a lot. There are so many AI music companies right now starting to generate music on the fly, sometimes with a little bit of a UI for a user to play around with things. There's so many, third-party video content being taken down and monetized by the majors because they have real songs in it. People are just going to be able to generate the song, put the video online, and release the music the next day on the platforms. Yeah, volume is going to be a big problem. And I like your analysis saying the platforms have figured it out. They know how to create music, and if you have a very, very long tail song that is not supposed to surface, it will never get 1,000 streams, and that's, I'm sure, 90% of the volume. But it's the supply side that has a problem because none of the companies are structured. Even the big distributors that we work with and we speak to, the CD Babies, the AWOL, the Believe, the TuneCore, their infrastructure is not technically they're built to release thousands of songs a day, but the human working in the company are not at all working like they have a portfolio of assets and every day they're looking at asset management. It's still basically listening to songs manually with ears and wondering is this song good or not, and that doesn't work with the scale of releases. All right, so I see
Absolutely.
time. No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if you tried to do that, you wouldn't sleep, right? You'd just have no time
Yeah.
left at all, and you still be able to work with the volume. So it's too exhausting.
All right, the third one, which I love because I speak to a lot of artists who are themselves wondering what to do, post-album creativity. I like the way you just saying post-album like it's a thing and we have to accept it. But yeah, I read a stat that 73% of kids below 25 have never listened to an album the way the artist has meant for them to listen to it. Some crazy number like this. Which was mind blowing. What do you think is going to happen for artists and for fans? How are people going to listen to music?
I think it's already happened because if you quote a stat like that, it just tells you that that whole audience has already changed behavior. And it doesn't mean everybody. So I think it's important because I'm the last person to want to talk about the death of albums and all of that because for a long time it was my preferred way of enjoying music. It's not anymore. So I've flipped. but many people in my demographic of my generation will always stick with albums. There's always something about an album that's special. Um, and I think we'll always have that, but we'll just find that it's more and more niche. Just like vinyl became more and more niche and will always serve that niche. So I think, the song has become the thing. Obviously, video is really important. And I think both of those formats will be already are being augmented differently. So the song is because it's been multiplied in various different ways. It's been remixed. We're seeing more acoustic versions, more producer versions of every track. So you get it out there in different formats. And then with video, we're starting to see that as well. I think one of the things that we'll see more of is longer content video, which may encompass one or two songs. It may be like the form of an EP. It's just a way of artists telling the stories. And I think that's going to be important. I think it's going to work pretty well for platforms like YouTube. And they're already stepping into, sponsoring documentaries and so on. So I think documentaries, I think storytelling through that format, obviously behind the scenes, some live video as well. We've already seen music movies really get to a scale we've never seen before. And there's going to be lots of interest in exploring catalog in that way. And actually, we're going to see some revival of albums as well, because you'll see bands going back to remix albums and interpret them differently. We've seen the Beatles do it. I think REM is doing it. They will serve that generation of superfans who are interested in that content. So there's kind of more of everything, more competition. But in a post-album world, you've got so many different formats to work with. I think it's probably more exciting for artists than we think. And I think that most artists are going to celebrate the idea of stepping out of an album cycle where you kind of work on this thing for 2 or 3 years. And it is the thing that then is expected to last for the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, we've seen artists, they might have put life and soul into an album for 2 or 3 years. They drop it in 2 weeks. Nobody can remember it even happened. So I think we're going to see a lot more creativity around that, which is great.
Yeah, we see that with song durations. I mean, there are albums that have 3 songs at 6 minutes, and then 9 songs at 1.5, and 2 songs at 3. Like the length of songs. There's a lot of papers about songs being shorter now than they were, but there's also a lot of people who still have a couple of tracks that are very long. Flume released a mixtape earlier this year, made a 23-minute movie. So I guess that's exactly where you were going. It's an EP mixtape that is songs one after the other, a bit mixed, but the content that he released was one video of 30 minutes, essentially a mini movie. For fans, it's such a great way to discover music, and you don't have the same experience on Spotify that you would have on YouTube as well. So yeah, I'm completely with you. I think it's a bit more scary for traditional companies who are trying to do a P&L. I will give you X advance for Y album for Z length, and I will make alpha revenue. Right now, it's like, I'm going to give you advance for I don't know how many songs. We're going to release songs in a kind of cadence. We're going to be almost always on, and then maybe we'll do this album kind of compilation at the end. The super fans might love it. Some people might not even know it's out. You have artists like Kanye who are very album, because each album is a concept, and the thing he just released had to be an album because it's such a global media moment. So yeah, I agree with you. It's a challenge, but in a way, I think creatively it will be a positive situation for a lot of artists. All right, another one that I like a lot because of my Frenchness, the global local culture. How do you manage music marketing and music development in a global world that is actually extremely local? Interesting to get your take on that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, hip hop is the classic example. I think hip hop, Latin for sure. But if you take hip hop, for me, that's classic, because you've got all these hip hop and urban artists coming through local labels, and I think it's different now, but I think people are getting their heads around it. But if you're a hip hop artist coming through a US or a UK label, the natural reaction of your label is to try and export you globally. That's what they've always done with pop, rock, whatever came before. But these days, it doesn't really necessarily have to travel if you're in that genre, because it's the scene that travels, right? So you definitely grime, hip hop, drill, all of this stuff has traveled, but it's come up through local artists. So it's definitely happening, obviously, in France, in Germany, and I mean all over Europe, also Latin America. Let's see what happens in Asia for that repertoire. But it's the scene that's exported globally, not necessarily
The
the
culture.
artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the culture and the scene. And in fact, so the culture is also global, but it's a local interpretation, because they're talking about local issues, national issues, political issues, social issues. It's almost like it's very much protest music. Um, So all of that for me, I think, is fascinating, because it is then about how um, labels and management level, right? So they're starting to they need to collaborate faster. They need to be able to not be incentivized to be always breaking an artist in one market and then expecting local smaller markets around the world to just take that artist and push them. If something's popping in that market, maybe there's some best practice that can be learned. Maybe there's more global levers that can be pulled through, things like Facebook, YouTube, playlist marketing, and so on. So all of that is just going to require a change in terms of the way organizations like labels have always done things and how they think. So in a way, they have to be global, but really, really nimble to what's going on locally. So that's a bit like how multinationals have been working for years in FMCG, again, pharmaceuticals. Um, you have to be super organized.
Yeah, the thing you mentioned about hip hop is so true. In some markets in the world, there is a quota on radio, like you cannot play less than 50% of French language music on the radio to like protect artistic culture. And there is no quota on streaming, but it's also because a lot of it is on demand, so you can't force people to listen to 50% French music. That would be a horrible user behavior in the product. But actually, they realized that if you look at the top charts on Deezer, Spotify, and stuff, it's basically local hip hop. I mean, of course, when Drake releases an album, he's 1 to 20 for a week, and everybody's pushed down 20 slots. Same
Yeah.
thing with Taylor Swift does it. But actually, there's a lot of local urban music, hip hop, drill, trap, whatever the local genre, that is just taking over the local charts. And it's the same thing in Germany and other markets. It used to be that American music would dominate, and today it's kind of a counterintuitive thing. But if I give you the chance of listening to any music in the world on demand, when you search, you will actually use local stuff, and maybe on playlist and algorithmic and recommendation, and you will hear about international stuff, but your daily life in your high school, when you talk to your friends, is going to be about that verse that is talking about that politician or that cultural moment in your country. And in that, hip hop is very, very local. You're right, it's completely global culture. Everybody kind of dresses the same and stuff, but very, very
Mm.
local. And even today, like artists like Lil Tecca, who is massive in America, is not known here. I mean, people would know Ransom, the song, but I don't think he would sell out 2,000 tickets in France, which wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. If you were the Little Tecca size act in Interscope or Republic, whoever has him now, you would be huge in France. That's just like there wouldn't be any problem.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting to the end. One of the trends was managing music's value, and I guess we kind of talked about it as a thread on the previous point. Um,
Yeah.
how do you see the value of music evolving? The
Oh my
perception.
God, that's the biggest challenge, without a doubt. I thought that Stephen Cooper's comments the other day were really interesting. So the head of Warner was saying that if you would go back in time and look at when streaming the streaming deal was first done, would you do the whole catalog 9.99, you know, uh, convergent one type deal? Because that doesn't exist in other media forms. It doesn't exist in games. It doesn't exist in video. It's very unique to music. And I think at the time it was seen to be kind of groundbreaking for music. Like many people in the video world want the same thing, but they're never going to get it because it doesn't work too well for the business. In fact, we're seeing the opposite, right? We're about to see 3 or 4 huge global video streaming services launch again.
With exclusivity each time, so nobody has the full catalog.
Yeah. So you have to make the choice: which 2 or 3 am I going to subscribe to? And you know, it's going to be very different picture in different markets. And I think Stephen Cooper's point was, if we'd have started off that way, maybe now we'd have more value in the industry. So if you'd have sliced and diced it somehow differently by genre or maybe by frontline catalog, then you might have a different overall value aggregation currently happening in the business. I mean, the other thing is, which is the final point, is to look at it from a superfan point of view. And back to Spotify, this is where I was really keen for Spotify to expand on this opportunity, but it's complex because if you're going to move into, I mean, they have all the data to do the fan first stuff, so they're doing all of that. But then if you go, you have to compete with the tickets business, and that's a hard business to compete with. Merch, that's very, very fragmented, and you know, have all the logistics and fulfillment. So how do you make it profitable? But I think there is lots of opportunity there, and I think the way the more we're talking about this idea of how you cultivate fandom in a very, very competitive world, particularly for the likes of Taylor Swift or, you know, up and coming artists that have got a big fan base in a country, is I think we are going to see some interesting models arise where we're talking about artists with subscriptions. I think just managing their communities better, monetizing those like small businesses, small SME global businesses, if you like, and how they arrange the representation around them is going to be different from what it is today, where it'll still involve managers and labels and streaming platforms, but just a different formula.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great points what you said. I mean, this could be an hour talk by itself. The value of music and where it's going, and how are artists going to monetize their music it's a central topic. There's some artists who now are taking a chance by saying, I'm going to do a subscription thing. I'm going to do the Patreon way. I'm not going to try to monetize my music one way. I'm going to monetize my Run the Jewels. I'm sure you know Darren. They give their music for free and get way more value for it.
Did an amazing job.
Yeah, the perception of value on one end by the fan does not mean immediate monetization. And so that takes us to the last point. You mentioning fan upsells is the money left on the table. So the other way would be, how can artists maximize their revenue without becoming without it becoming too much. What do you think is the fine line for an artist? What should an artist feel like they can do, and where should they stop and it just becomes, not artistic and just too brutal? That's a big question we're getting from people saying, I get money from streaming, I get money from live, I get money from publishing. I want to do those deluxe package and sell hoodies and t-shirts and I want to tell ticketing and price everything right. And then at the end, it just feels too much. And I feels like I'm pushing my fans for consumption where it needs to be, it's still art in the end. So where's the upsell, and where is it that people probably shouldn't try to maximize revenue?
Yeah, it's really tough because I think you've got to do all of those things. And yeah, I mean, I look at ticket prices sometimes and I think, they've crossed the line from being good value to being exploitation, right? And there's some artists I'd love to see live. I'm just not going to pay the $100+ to do it. I know that's not just the artist, but it's just an example of not pushing fans too far. in terms of exploitation. It's hard because that's the way they're making money. So I think some of these things is about smart marketing and just being as an artist having a really really good strategy about what you're about, portfolio careers to match that, be them in music, writing feature artists and performers, maybe performing in more than one band, and then also doing other things as well. I know that's not the solution. I think much of the solution has to be the industry itself making sure it extracts better value from the systems that it has. So it's back to that equation that we just talked about the $9.99 price point or the nature of the deal. There's got to be some economic changes to the way music is put out there commercially, for sure.
I want to take I think this is so much information. We're gonna try to write a little bit on those points to have to allow people to have the time to digest all the info.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the piece. I appreciate that because it's it's a conversation and it's a debate, right? Everybody's got a solution, and actually, I don't think we're talking about it enough.
Yeah, and also what I like is it's the kind of the end of the year and everybody thinks the market is moving fast. My bet is that things are going to move faster and faster. The technology innovation is not slowing down, and it becomes easier and easier and cheaper to do things that were just unthinkable a few years ago. What I liked about the article is it makes us think about topics that are not, which platform should you use to do a short link, or which, it's not kind of short-term things. There are questions that are still going to be open tomorrow. And next year we could have the same discussion about how do we manage music value, how do you manage linear decline. Those things are not going away tomorrow. All right, I want to kind of wrap it up, and we talked a little bit about the song sommelier at the beginning of our exchange. After all this data curation, algorithmic insights discussion, people are gonna be surprised about your newest initiative. So, can you talk a little bit about the song sommelier and how you are yourself doing your own counterculture in a way?
Yeah, well, yeah. Thanks for bringing it up. It's exactly that. So I believe whenever trends take hold of an industry, um, and we've got at the moment in music that's volume, it's data, it is a commoditization that's going on. There's no doubt about it. I'm always interested in counterculture. I've always been interested in counterculture. I'm really interested that young people, under the age of 20, get obsessed with vinyl or even cassette, and they do want to actually read the liner notes, and they do want to look. They really appreciate conceptual artwork and cover art and things like that, and the image of the artist that they're following. So those things might be drowned out right now, but they are still very important to us as human beings and how we appreciate art, how we identify with that type of music or those artists. And so I did the song sommelier to bring the art back. So we call it vinyl values to playlists right now. That's what it is. It's playlists plus original artwork, which is done to an incredible level by our artist Mick Clark, who is a proper artist and could have one of those guys, that did album covers in the day, where you really think through the concept, not just what might look good, and then some writing around it, and really good curation. So it's kind of it's very universal. It's maybe aimed at people who are older and time poor, but actually some very young people really love it as well because they are kind of appreciating what is currently missing. And essentially, what's missing is context and that old-fashioned kind of quality over quantity type ethos or thinking. So I put this together. It's doing pretty well. It's always going to be niche, but it's amazing to see people find it around the world, which is back to the kind of global thing about how you do things online. I work with Sounds Good, which is a team based in Paris, who have a great player that works on everything except Amazon Music. And I've told Amazon they need to be on board. And so it doesn't matter what streaming platform you use, you can discover the playlist through it. So at the moment, that's what we are, but we're going to build it out. It's going to be a curation platform that's going to have events, podcasts, of course, and maybe it's just a way of rethinking music journalism in a way as well.
One, the artworks are amazing. We're gonna link to the song Sommelier, and we'll also link to Sounds Good. They happen to be French, so we'll give them an extra
Yeah,
push. Josquin, the CEO, is an amazing guy, and their product has been used by hundreds of thousands of people, either making playlists or MIDiA pushing the embedded player on their websites. And so millions of people have listened to music using Sounds Good without even knowing
yeah.
that there is a third party between them and the platform. Um,
But also, when you're using an app like that, a player app, it's the way it looks is so much better than a widget from any of the current platforms, right? That you can put the art into the player. It looks beautiful. You can throw it around the web, and I think what those guys have done is really cool.
yeah, for sure. And there's a community part to what they're doing because it's a bunch of people who love music. So there's people from blogs
Yeah,
and radios and brands and people like you and just like normal fans and artists, and it's a great way to share music across different platforms in a highly fragmented
yeah.
world. All right, so to wrap it up, I have two questions that I always ask everybody. Um, Question number one: what advice would you give a young manager or an artist trying to make in the industry? Um, the artist or the manager doesn't have a massive team. It's insane the amount of possibilities of things they could be doing to try to push their song forward. What's the kind of not generic 1, 2, 3 steps, but what can we tell those types of people who maybe don't know what to start with?
Yeah, it, yeah, it's tough. There's so many choices to make, and so much competition. I think ultimately, let's say you know you've got a good product and you believe in what you're doing. That's I think you have to really look at that hard and know that you have something special. Beyond that, it's like where do you place it? So it's what in marketing, we still don't talk about it enough. It's positioning. So what type of artist are you? Is it from a post-punk band to a new take on electronic pop? What are you bringing to that particular community? Who do you know in that community? So where are you going to fit? This is where collectives have been so successful. Jazz collectives, Afro pop collectives. If you can be part of that because you're bringing different form of expression, but you're somehow also you're adding to the whole. I think that's important. So, what is your positioning in that culture? Um, then, I think taking your time. I mean, ultimately, patience. You can, at the moment, you're in a position where you can put songs out. If you really believe in what you do, you can put songs out, 2 or 3 tracks on your own. Maybe work with a manager. Maybe work with a collective or a sponsor. Get some feedback. Know which tracks are resonating, how you get some idea of how you want to build that audience, so that when you come to have people approach you or you're seeking representation, you just have a much stronger feel about what it is that you're about. Don't have anybody push you in a certain direction. I think that the artists that I look at now that I'm really impressed by, often they're really young. I mean, there's people like Sam Fender, kind of brought Bruce Springsteen style rock back to a generation of people under 20. That proves to me that people want to hear that type of music. Again, it's very human. To someone like Sudan Archives, who's making a really different kind of hip hop, or R&B rather, with violin and all of that kind of really grand arrangements to it. They're just bringing something different, and they're probably driving that creatively. I can't see anybody pushing those people around. Advice, yes, but not trying to push them in one direction or another. They're too strong in what they do.
So you're essentially almost saying there's room for so many types of music, and niche doesn't really mean small today. Having a singular voice and pushing that forward rather than trying to fit uh, is actually sometimes a better way of getting an initial fan base, um, for sure. All right, to wrap it up, the question that makes people think the most: what would you tell the 19-year-old Keith if you met him today? What advice would you give yourself?
Uh, don't mix your drinks.
Not a bad one.
No, I would say, particularly if you are, yeah, everybody's different, but what drives me is progress and new thinking and all of that. So I think, I wasn't 19, but going back to when I joined the industry, I was actually 30 when I started the IFPI. It's not about what you know. Expertise is very overrated. In the environment that you and I have discussed right now, expertise is overrated. What's underrated is listening, better conversations, making sure you are good to work with and you appreciate other people and finding your people, getting the people around you that you know you can trust and you think they are good and they're going to drive you. Communication. Those are the things to figure out. It's not about what you think you can do and how much you know. That doesn't matter. You have to work with other people.
Amen. Well, thanks so much for your time, man. We have been in touch for a few years by email, but we had never talked. So it was great to get to know you better on this very specific format. I'll see you soon in London when I come. And be well. We'll link to all of the good stuff in the below the interview.
Yeah, and I'm looking out for the next moves from Soundcharts and wish you guys good luck. And you know where I am if you need a helping hand. If you wanna chat, I'm right here.
For sure. Speak soon, man. Bye bye.
All right, David. Goodbye.